Now, I don't know about you guys, but when Battlefield 1 was first released, and playing during the beta I noticed this, I was really chuffed that DICE had changed up how the Scout class was going to perform in multiplayer. We got some significant changes to how the weapons would perform, and really, the class had some life injected into it, because for as long as I can remember, it was always relegated to this class that people would simply resort to, stay out of the action, and get some long-range kills from time to time. However, soon after the launch, I think it became very clear that the changes, while certainly sprucing things up and making it more effective in a different way, it arguably became too effective, and once again, lots of people flocked to the class, and I think for one specific reason: the sweet spot mechanic. You can forget the increase in bullet velocity and the perceived reduction in bullet drop in Battlefield 1, I'll get onto those points later on in the video, but the sweet spot is what I think both elevated the Scout class to new heights, lots of people playing the Scout class, and it reduced the class to just simply a complaint among the community as well. Too many people playing the Scout class. Now, I think the ultimate aim of the Scout changes in Battlefield 1 was to break down that barrier to entry and allow pretty much any player of any skill level to get to grips with the Scout class, which could, in previous Battlefield games, have been difficult to grasp compared to the others that you could play as. By introducing a sweet spot to the damage model, that's a distance point where bullets could hit the upper torso and do 100 damage, DICE was allowing players to land one-hit kills and get a sense of pride and accomplishment for using a class that previously would have required a lot more practice and a lot more precision to achieve the same outcome. The sweet spots were placed at different distances as well, so I guess you can say you did need a little bit of knowledge to know what to do. Depending on the situation, a different game mode, a different map, you'd need to pick the right rifle to gain access to that sweet spot range that works best in that scenario. So on Amiens, for example, you'd best be taking the Martini Henry or the Lee Enfield, both of which have close range sweet spots, whereas on maps like Empire's Edge or Galicia, you'd be best served taking the M1903 Springfield, the sweet spot not starting until all the way out at 100 meters. So there's a little bit of knowledge needed there, but after playing the game for a few hours and unlocking the different sniper rifles, I think it's pretty obvious which ones you need to choose. Now, as I've already said, the Scout class in Battlefield 1 is both a good and a bad thing, depending on who you talk to and the different scenarios, but one of the scenarios where it works well is because Battlefield 1's overall ranges have been shrunk compared to previous titles. The sweet spot works really well here. The maps are inherently smaller, all classes are rebalanced and integrated into an engagement range structure system, and in terms of verticality, there are only a few maps in the game that offer those kind of scenarios. The sweet spot directly encourages scouts to close the gap to their target and use that 100 damage to the upper torso to their advantage. And at the same time, it coaxes the scout into the engagement ranges of other classes like the support and the medic, both of which should be able to take down a scout at the mid-range. Previous Battlefield games didn't have the same reliance as Battlefield 1 does on engagement range balancing. You'd find in previous games that most people challenging snipers were other snipers, because they were the ones who could do the most damage at those kind of ranges. As I've said previously, Battlefield 1 encourages the scouts to get a little bit closer, and that brings all of the other classes' power up a little bit when they get into the right engagement range, and should be able to beat a scout if they're in the right situation. Now, let's talk about bullet drop and bullet velocity. Battlefield 1 changed up a lot of things here too, and it has a big effect on the Scout class. Now, overall, the bullet velocity of most weapons in Battlefield 1 was drastically increased over previous Battlefield games, with the light machine guns, the medic rifles, and the bolt-action rifles seeing most of the benefit. Now, when you increase the velocity that a bullet leaves the barrel at, the faster it's going to reach the location to which you were aiming. And this means you're not going to need to lead your targets as much as you did if they're moving at range. Or at least that was the intention with Battlefield 1. The game also introduced bullet drag, and this is a mechanic that simulated the effect of air resistance on the bullet you fired, causing it to slow down the further it flies. This should have resulted in you potentially still needing to lead your target as much as you did before in previous Battlefield games. However, as we've just discussed, with Battlefield 1's overall ranges being reduced and maps being somewhat smaller than they were, the effect of bullet drag on bullets isn't as prevalent as it might have been had the maps been larger overall. With most engagements happening closer to home than they did in previous Battlefield games, you're not going to see the bullet drag take the effect that I think was intended when the system was designed. And with the sweet spot then encouraging scouts to close the gap even more between themselves and the target further away, the bullet drag system only stands as another reinforcement of the same message. At extreme long ranges, you're not going to find it easier to hit your target, you're going to find it harder and harder, so it's best you just close the gap and get a little bit closer to your target. And bullet drop factors into all of this as well, with scouts closing the gap, trying to use that sweet spot 100 damage, and avoiding the slowing of bullets at longer range. You're not going to see bullet drop become anywhere near as much of a factor as it was in previous games, because you're simply not operating at ranges where it becomes a mechanic that you actually have to worry about. In previous Battlefield games, it was common that anything beyond 100 meters or so, you need to start leading your target and aiming above the head so you could try and get a long-range headshot, because by the time the bullet got there, the player had moved. In Battlefield 1, that doesn't really happen all that often. Now, with that all in mind, all laid out in front of you, I think it's clear to see that the changes DICE made to the Scout class for Battlefield 1 were better and worse at the same time. I think they removed barriers to entry for all players to give the class a go, an easy route into the Scout class if you will, but they removed elements of skill from the class at the same time due to things that they added to the Scout class. Now, there are lots of ways that you could remedy this situation, but really, I think it's something that the next Battlefield game, Battlefield 2018, is going to have to tackle, because let's face it, those kind of changes are not going to happen in Battlefield 1 now, with just a skeleton crew working on bug fixes and small updates to the game. In a perfect world, I'd like to see the next Battlefield game scale back some of the changes DICE made for Battlefield 1, and that applies to lots of other things in Battlefield 1 as well, not just the Scout class, but for the Scout class in particular, I'd like to see the removal of the sweet spot mechanic, and, this is rather a big wish this one, an increase in the overall scale of the maps that we fight on. That's so skills like precision, leading targets, and bullet drop compensation can re-enter the Scout class. Precision needed for headshots to secure those one-shot kills is perhaps the biggest thing for me, because there's nothing more satisfying than nailing a guy at 150 meters or so away with a single bullet to the head, but in Battlefield 1 you can do that by hitting the upper torso, which is of course a far larger target. I think some of the awesomeness was lost there, and sometimes you do need that awesomeness. That's what keeps people coming back and playing video games, those cool moments that you don't forget. And in Battlefield, lining up a shot at long range, calculating for bullet drop, and leading your target, and landing the headshot that you wanted to get, that's a pretty awesome experience. However, I don't want them to completely scale back everything they did in Battlefield 1, because some good improvements were made. I'd like them to keep the increased bullet velocity and the bullet drag system as well. But with that tied into larger maps overall, I think you'd see a return to gameplay styles where you need to lead targets at range and account for bullet drop too, as the bullet slows down the further it travels. A bit more skill coming back into the Scout class. I think you're always going to have an issue where players playing Scout operate at longer ranges and potentially don't play the objective as much as other classes, but as long as they're spotting people through that high-powered scope, they're doing something to help their team. I think the sweet spot kind of just overstepped the mark on how much help the developers needed to give new players who wanted to come and play Battlefield for the first time. Some people argue that the sweet spot helps with positioning, and if you know you're at the right range, you're going to get that one-shot kill, but I guarantee you, no real scout is calculating the range of their shots. If they are, they might be using, I don't know, a nearby flag to kind of figure out how far away they are, but most of the time, I would argue people just look through their scope and try and shoot somebody. That's at least what I do anyway. There are more people in condensed areas in Battlefield 1, and if you're playing Scout, I'm just going to look through the scope and try and shoot somebody before they shoot back at me and I'm dead on the floor. But there we are, that's what I think, but even more so, I think it's what you guys think is more important. You're the community, you're the guys and girls playing this game in the franchise that we love, so please leave your thoughts down below today. I'd be really interested to see what you guys think. But thanks very much for watching, leave me a rating so I know if you like this video or not, and make sure you subscribe and click that little notification bell too, so you know every single time I upload a video. But until next time, my name is Westie, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.